So welcome everyone. I'm John, Father John Deere, and again, this is part 3 of our five-part series on the Gospel of John. And I'm really hoping these reflections are helpful. And let's, as usual, begin with a little short prayer. So I just invite everybody just to take a deep breath and relax and notice how you're feeling. And let's turn to the presence of the God of peace who loves each one of you. And let's notice how we're feeling tonight and welcome the nonviolent Jesus into our hearts and our circle. And again, give thanks for all the blessings of life and love and peace. And take a moment to ask for whatever graces we need to do God's will and follow Jesus. God of peace, be with us now as we reflect on the Gospel of John. Bless us, strengthen us, heal us, disarm us. Give us your wisdom, light, life, and grace, that we might go forward renewed to live life to the full and follow Jesus, our good shepherd, in the life of nonviolence, peace, and universal love, that we might resist death and do our part to end war, poverty, racism, fascism, greed, hatred, nuclear weapons, environmental destruction, and all the forms of death, that we might welcome the fullness of life here on earth, your reign of peace. Amen. So welcome again, everybody. Today we're going to dive right back in to the Gospel of John, chapter 10, I think, verse 1. Last week we were looking at the end of the story of the spectacular story in chapter 9 of Jesus healing the blind man and how they want to kill him for doing that. And so, but today we're coming to the climax of John, and the next thing you know, as you know, it'll be the Last Supper discourse. So here we're going to hear these spectacular teachings about life. Jesus announces, I'm the good shepherd, and I've come to bring life and life to the full. Really, it's that simple. I think that's the thesis of the whole Gospel of John. Life, life, life. And how to talk about our predicament, from what Jesus was dealing with then to what we're dealing with today. Well, I think we're full of death, 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 the culture of death. And we go about our business, the big business of death, as if it's perfectly normal, and that we can be part of following the Good Shepherd and living life, and he's going to take care of us, even as we support the big business of death and the killing machines of the world. And I mean that metaphorically too, from corporations to war to fossil fuels industry, and just the whole supporting the lifestyle that's oppressing so many people around the world. So the question for me as I've been going through this is, how can I non-cooperate with the culture of death, leave the culture of death, and only listen to the Good Shepherd and follow him on the path of life and try to live life to the full? When I was a kid, when I was 21, Daniel Bergen told me that I was to spend my life resisting death. But if I was going to be doing that, I needed to learn how to live life to the full, really live life. And I learned that from watching Dan, who was really hated around the country when I first met him. But wow, did he enjoy life. He enjoyed food, he enjoyed his friends, he enjoyed nature, and he enjoyed jokes and stories and poetry till the day he died. So I learned a lot. So Jesus says, chapter 10, I am the gate. I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. My sheep know my voice and follow me. They do not follow, and he names others, thieves, robbers, and hirelings. A thief comes to steal, slaughter, and destroy. I come that you might have life and life more abundantly. Wow. That's just infinitely rich and ours for the asking. I wonder sometimes as I think about this week, there's this easy feeling that Christians have. Oh, we're off the hook. We have a good shepherd. But I think there's a choice that he leaves us the choice. It's like right out of Deuteronomy. I'm offering you life and death. Choose life that you and your descendants may live. We have to choose the fullness of life and choose to leave the culture of death. And that means responsibility. We have to take responsibility and take action to make sure we're not listening to other voices, the thieves, the robbers, those who come to destroy, and making sure we're not among those. Instead, that we're totally listening and attentive to the Good Shepherd and the voice of peace who's trying to guide us into literally greener pastures. Um, we're told it's winter, it's the Feast of Dedication. He's in the temple, and they start challenging him and attacking him. And the whole chapter has this theme. Again, he says, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, they follow me. I give them eternal life, they shall never perish. Uh, do we believe that? I think we do in the long haul sense of that word, like it's in all the Gospels, that nothing can harm us. Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi and Oscar Romero, his anniversary recording today, were brutally killed, but they live on completely, I believe. And that's what the gospel is talking about. I think if we give ourselves over to death, we won't live on. And the choice is ours. We're being invited to the fullness of life. And this is a consistent theme of the Gospels and the Scriptures, but it's so focused here in chapter 10, and it's all leading up to chapter 11. So my questions are, do we want a good shepherd? Do we want the fullness of life? What is keeping us from living life to the full? Whose voice are we listening to? He says that twice. My sheep hear my voice and they know my voice and they follow me. Well, don't presume you're part of his flock. Let's really reflect on that. And who are we really following? And do we want the greener pastures of peace and the fullness of life? And I think that means really turning from I like the word instantiation of death. We can have nothing to do with war, the military, working for weapons, working for corporations that have to do with oil, fossil fuels. We can't have guns. And just go through that. We have to renounce the traces of violence within us, beginning with racism and sexism and violence toward ourselves and our neighbor and others and so forth. And then the gospel ends with the famous words, the Father and I are one, and they pick up rocks to stone him to death. And then they try to arrest him and he escapes. He escapes assassination and he leaves, and we come to the climax of the Gospel of John, the raising of Lazarus. Now, I know some of you have heard this from me before, and maybe you've read my book. I'm hoping that even if you've heard this before, that it will be helpful because it's such a different way of looking at John. So this is all from my book, Lazarus Come Forth. And I also did a podcast about it. And I'm going through basically those notes, even though I've gone through them carefully again, but I still like what I wrote originally. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And I'm going to go through it all. And I just invite you to listen and let it kind of wash over you. And the question from the start is, where are you in the story of chapter 11? I think it's so brilliantly written, but there's different characters who are caricatures, and there's part of us in all of them, but we're all called to be like Jesus. Now, here's the thesis, and you already know it because I said it from day one. Based on chapter 9, verse 1, which we looked at last week, that Jesus walked by and saw humanity born blind from birth. Jesus is now seeing humanity dead in the culture of death. It's such a rich image that Jesus is the God of life, calling dead humanity out of the tombs. It's just, if thesis is true, and Wes Howard Brooke goes into it, and I write a much more popular version of it, I mean, I think easier to read. If this is true, then it makes total sense to me that the John community would rewrite the story from Matthew, Mark, and Luke and tell a completely different story. How can they just tell us who Jesus is and what they're experiencing? So they move the civil disobedience to the beginning of the story, and they end up with Jesus calling the whole human race out of the culture of death. And the next thing you know, we're at the Passover. So it's spectacular. So here goes. Buckle your seatbelts. The news comes that the dear friend Lazarus is dying and dead. And so what happens? Jesus stays where he is. He waits for 2 days. And then he says, we're going to go back to Lazarus. And for the very first time in a lot of chapters, we hear about the male disciples. They've been gone from all these episodes, and now they make this reappearance. And they're terrified. Why? Because apparently the assassination that happened 2 verses before the assassination attempt is where Lazarus died, back in Bethany. And Jesus waited to make sure he's dead, and now he's going to go back there. And the disciples are you crazy? Those people just tried to kill you, and you want to go back there? Yes, we're going back there. Actually, he doesn't say, yes, we're going back there. He says, our friend Lazarus has died. Hugely important. Lazarus is one of his best friends, and so is Martha and Mary. This is like Jesus's safe house. That's the way I look at it, in an underground, scary world where he's being hunted. This is like the one safe place. And now he says, hey, Lazarus is your friend too. Our friend is dead. We got to go back there. In other words, hello, don't we agree that there's no greater love than laying down your life for your friends? Isn't that brilliant to see how all this is connected? I love all of that. What are you willing to do for your friends? I learned from Daniel Berrigan that the heart of the Gospel of John is friendship. Isn't that wonderful? Friendship with Jesus, friendship within the community, the Johannine community then and the Johannine community today. And Jesus will say that. We're going to hear that next week. I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. I love that. Let's go. And so isn't this total nonviolence? What more about nonviolence do we need to know? We're just getting up and going back to be with our friend who's in trouble or dying or dead. And it doesn't matter the cost to us. We're not afraid. We're with the Good Shepherd. Jesus always acts in the spirit of friendship, community, nonviolence, and steadfast, faithful love, even to the point that laying down one's life for one's friends is completely natural and normal for Jesus. So what do the male disciples do? This just cracks me up. I always think this would all be funny if it weren't so tragic. And it's just like out of a movie. Robin Williams could have done this. Thomas, the disciple Thomas, who'll go down in history for being doubting, gets this one line right here. Let us go and die with him. And you go, wow, look at that. That's brilliant. That's what they should be doing. And the next sentence is, when Jesus arrived in Bethany. Now, to my reading, it's very clear that they're all talk and they don't walk the walk, that the male disciples do not go to Bethany with Jesus because they're never in the story. They only appear later again in chapter 12. Now, I think that makes sense. And that's kind of the way I see most of us privileged churchmen in the world today, talking the talk, let us go and die with him, and not walking the walk. But, I don't have to just talk about priests and ministers like me, but all of us Christians, it's very powerful the way John frames all this. So, that concerns me, this classic male macho making great promises to Christ, but when it comes to confronting the culture of death, not doing it because we're scared. So John, and this I really invite you to ponder, gives us an amazing image of Jesus by himself, in my opinion, vulnerable, all alone, unarmed, walking right back to the death squads who just tried to kill him in the symbol of the culture of death in Bethany, to stand with his friend, which I'm proposing is the whole human race. You see, Jesus is friends with humanity. And he values friendship with humanity more than anyone else. So then we come upon this second group of people. These are the professional mourners. And, they're called Judeans. They're called the crowd that's mourning, but they're very devout. And they're weeping over a dead person in their community. These are the same devout religious people who just tried to kill Jesus. Full of death, loving death, mourning death, trying to bring on more death. Do you see the richness of this text? And compared to what we just heard in chapter 10 about life and life to the full, they're fulfilling their religious obligation to mourn Lazarus, and they show public sorrow for his death, yet their hearts, like ours in the culture of death, are full of murder. And so I'm trying to say, how are we like them? We don't want to be like them. And then we meet, I propose, the two greatest disciples in the four gospels, the two holy women, Martha and Mary, perhaps Jesus's best friends with Lazarus. So again, these are maybe his, like Jesus's best family friends. They always have dinner parties for the poor guy. And they're heroic women. They serve Christ. They love him. And what are we told? They're in the 30-day ritual mourning period, and they're besides themselves with grief. And we're told two times, that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Why? This is important. I mean, we're told it a second time. So why we do? According to Jewish belief, the soul of the dead person leaves the body after 3 days. That's the heart of the problem here. So theoretically, I suppose John is saying, hey, you could have raised Lazarus before up to the 3rd day, but it's day 4, he's gone. You see what I mean? So don't bother. There's nothing there. Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is gone. Jesus is too late. There's nothing that can be done. And so we get this outcry twice. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And remember, Jesus remained where he was for 2 days to make sure Lazarus was dead. It's all very important, very powerful. So that cry of the two greatest disciples, let's say possibly they were, total, utter hopelessness in the face of Christ and God. And these are the two best, the two women. So, a voice that we all know, our disappointment in Christ before the power of death. Lord, if you had been here, how many times we think that, then our relatives and friends would not have died. We would not be dying. Death would not hold power over us, or we wouldn't be waging war or have genocide in Israel or the threat of nuclear war or catastrophic climate change. And this is at the heart of the climax of John. This is what the Johannine community is dealing with, and it's what we're dealing with. It's just that we're in such denial and we numb ourselves, or so depressed and despairing, we don't even want to face how bad things are, but they're really bad. And Jesus looks everything right in the eye. He's not afraid at all. And he's vulnerable, and he's unarmed, and he's nonviolent, and he looks them in the eye, and he looks us in the eye, and he says, the greatest thing ever said in human history. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever is fully alive right now, in this present moment, which, by the way, is in my presence, this moment of resurrection peace, and believes in me and walks with me in the fullness of life, which means total nonviolence, having nothing to do with death, but always confronting death. If you do that with me, you will never die. And then he puts the question to them and to us. Do you believe this? So that's the question of the Gospel of John. And that's the question I invite you to really sit with in the next few weeks and months and year as we look at our country and ourselves and where we are in the story. And go slow with an answer, as Rilke said, trying to live our way into the question and the answer. Mary, remember, comes up, and Jesus sees Mary and the others weeping. Let's just make sure I got this right here. So I just feel like I've lost a page, which is possible, because of the lighting where I'm at. Martha, as I recall, and I may have skipped it, says, yes, I've come to believe that you are the Messiah, the one coming in the world. Remember that? And what does she do? She then turns and runs away from Jesus. Don't do it, Martha. If you really believe that, you wouldn't go. And she goes and gets Mary and says, hey, he's asking for you. Valerie and Bill, that's totally right. Jesus doesn't talk about being Messiah. He says he's the resurrection. And if he is the Messiah and the resurrection, why is she running away from him? Because she's scared, and she gets Mary and says, the teacher is asking for you. The teacher was never asking for her. She's just scared. So Mary comes and falls down and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then Jesus sees that the Judeans have come with her, and everybody's sobbing and weeping over death. And Jesus says the famous line, where have you laid him? And now the Judeans, professional mourners, whom I call the people of the culture of death, so there's this crowd, say to Jesus three incredible words. Come and see. You all remember that? The Gospel of John begin with, Andrew and Philip. Where do you live? Come and see. Come and Jesus inviting them into the fullness of life, into discipleship, into his way of nonviolence. Now, the people of the culture of death try to recruit Jesus into their ways of death, into the culture of death. Hey, Jesus, come and be a disciple of death. Do you see how John has framed this? I don't know if that makes sense. I just think that's amazing. The same words that John uses to have Jesus invite us into the new life of love and peace and nonviolence, discipleship. Now the people of the culture of death use to recruit Jesus into the culture of death. And the next two words some of the most famous in the Bible, and we're told Jesus wept. And they shake their heads in disbelief, saying, oh, if only he had done something, which is what the way they feel as that Jesus dies on the cross, which the way we feel when we watch the news. Oh, that's too bad. If only somebody had done something. That's death. And that's in us too, being despairing and depressing and not following him in proactive nonviolence. How often we shake our heads and say, if only he had done something. In other words, so if you really are entering into that scene with me, Martha and Mary and all the professional mourners sobbing, now recruiting Jesus into the culture of death. Nobody believes in Jesus. Everybody believes in death. The question is always for us who care about Jesus, how does this make him feel? You want to know who Jesus is, and you want to follow him as you're reading the Gospels, ask not what it means to you, what is he going through? How is he feeling here? He's done everything he can, especially in chapter 10, to call us to life, the fullness of life, to explain everything about the culture of life and death. And he's telling us, he's giving us the gift of life, and he's going to offer his own life and standing with the God of life. And he's completely, I submit, in this scene, totally rejected by everyone. The people of the culture of death, which means the people of the Roman Empire, the religious people who go along with the Roman Empire, and everybody who living in fear. Hey, Jesus, come and see our ways of death. And how do we do that today? We're doing the same thing. Wow, am I seeing that here in Lynchburg, Virginia today? And so we're told Jesus breaks down and weeps. And I hope you're with me on this, and maybe you've heard me say it before, but I submit, contrary to everything we've been told for 2,000 years, Jesus does not weep because Lazarus has died. Earlier, in the second sentence, it said Jesus rejoices. He's glad that Lazarus has died. He thinks, wow, maybe now they'll believe me. And now he sees they don't. So he breaks down sobbing and weeping. He finds everyone given over to the power and the control and omnipotence of death. So he breaks down sobbing because everyone in the scene, the male disciples were gone, all the religious folk, even his beloved friends and greatest disciples, Martha and Mary, every one of them and all of us believe not in the God of life, but fully in the culture of death. Jesus weeps not because his friend has died, but because every drop of faith and hope has died. I think all of us at some point say, like the characters at this moment, you know, Jesus, we think you're a really good person, but we're, sorry, but there's nothing that can be done. You might have given it a good try earlier, but there is no hope, Jesus. Death gets the last word. There's nothing that can be done. Jesus is sobbing. They're trying to recruit him into the culture of death. There's no hope. The story is over. The gospel is over. And this is classic Jesus. That's when Jesus takes action. It's fantastic. There's nothing passive about our God. He is full on confronting it. And I think it's one of the greatest sentences in the Bible, even an image to keep for the rest of your life. Jesus approached the tomb. So think of the young student standing in Tiananmen Square in front of the line of 20 tanks. That's Jesus approaching the tomb, right? Think of Gandhi's nonviolent followers facing the Darazan assault miners with their steel poles, and they just line up and got beaten one at a time demanding free salt for the poor. Or Dr. King, all the civil rights activists, from the freedom fighters to Birmingham getting beaten up and facing the troops on the dogs and the fire hoses and going to jail. Or Dan and Phil Berrigan and their friends going to Catonsville and burning draft files with homemade napalm. Or the Plowshares activists, all of us going in and hammering on nuclear weapons. To my mind, that's approaching the tomb. So this image of Jesus, and that's what we're seeing here. The God of life here on earth, confronting the culture of death, which has trapped and entombed every human being who ever lived. And there, standing in front of the tomb, the nonviolent Jesus, who is the fullness of the God of life, who earlier in the Synoptics gave us these new commandments, blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies, offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. He issues what I propose you consider as 3 new commandments. This is the climax of John. You're still with me. First, take away the stone. Wow. And Martha, the greatest of them all, she cries out, no, what do you think you're doing? Not that. You don't seem to understand, Jesus. There's nothing that can be done. He's dead 4 days now. Lazarus is gone. Death has won out. Please don't trouble yourself. In other words, don't trouble me. Don't get me in trouble, because I don't really care about my dead brother now. Please don't make us confront death, Jesus, even if you are the resurrection and the life, or the Messiah, or the one who is to come. All that's gone out the window. And then she blurts out the most ridiculous and tragic sentence of all. For God's sakes, man, think of the stench. Do you see? That's why I always say Martha and Mary are like Lucy and Ethel. I don't know if that goes over well, but that's the way I see this. They're so fabulous. This is the first time we really have a disciple trying to stop Jesus. Think about that. It's so dramatic. And of all people, the great woman, Martha, who's just like all of us, and the men aren't even there. So she got very far with him. She tries to stop Jesus. This is the voice of total despair, the voice of no hope whatsoever, the voice which says, once you're dead, you're dead. And she does what we all do. And I really invite you to ponder this for the rest of the week. She resists the command to take away the stone that's keeping humanity dead. Why? Why does Martha do that? Why does Martha try to stop Jesus? Why does she try to stop the people from rolling away the stone? Why is she trying to stop him from raising Lazarus? Why do we resist this commandment? Why? Because we do not want resurrection. It's very upsetting. If resurrection happens, all bets are off. Everything's up for grabs. Everything we think about reality and life. We don't want that much freedom and its implications. If life is guaranteed, if our survival is guaranteed, then what's holding us back? What are we afraid of? We prefer to live off the comforts of empire and the first world and war and the culture of death. There's nothing that can be done. And if you get involved and try to roll away the stone and do something and resist, it's going to get messy and it's going to stink up your life. And there's going to be a big stench. That's my total experience. I think David has passed out. Everybody's asleep. But I'm going to keep going here, everybody, whether you're listening or not, because I love all this. Take away the stone. So somehow or other, the stone gets taken away. And now at the end of the story, for the first time in the Gospel of John, chapter 11, the first time Jesus prays. Now, what do we think of that? Jesus never prays. And what's again so funny is, and I'm sure you must have heard me say this before, so forgive me, but earlier, Martha tries to teach Jesus how to pray. Don't do it, Martha. I just think that's not going to work. Don't try to instruct God on how to pray. Now, listen, Jesus, here's what you do. I'm sure that whatever you ask God, God will grant you, And what does Jesus do? He does not do what Martha says. Isn't that interesting? He does not ask God, God, will you please raise Lazarus from the dead for me? Which is what Martha is trying to instruct Jesus. So she doesn't believe he's the resurrection, the life, or the Messiah, or the one who is to come, I think. Jesus instead offers the most radical prayer of all, which is very instructive. Thank you, he says directly to God. So that's enough to go on for the rest of our lives right there. I mean, what? Huh? What? Oh, the stone has been rolled away. Human beings did that. Jesus didn't do that. And he thanks God that the stone has been rolled away that's blocking humanity from coming into the new life of resurrection. So we need to spend time thinking and reflecting on our practice of gratitude and how we can be more and more grateful. And I think that might mean being really disciplined at it. I have to do that sometimes because I'm such a knucklehead and so dense. I have to take time and say, I'm not moving until I say to God, I'm thankful for these 10 things. Just keep thanking God over and over, but mainly for the movements of justice and disarmament and life that are rolling the stone of death away. Do you see what I mean? We got to be grateful for the movements, the victories we've already had. And there have been many in all of our lifetimes, starting with Dr. King and the civil rights movements and the women's movement, the environmental movement, and so many other victories. We give thanks for them. So, he's calling us to live in relationship to God. And in that relationship, instead of telling God or asking God, it's thanking God for what God is doing among us. Then the second commandment, Lazarus, come forth. So Lazarus is the whole human race buried in the tomb of the empire of death, stuck in the culture of war, really, and empire. In other words, we're all dead in one way or the other because of this culture. And the God of life in the nonviolent Jesus is calling every human being out of the trappings of death and the culture of death. Leave your tombs. You don't have to be dead anymore. You do not have to go along with the culture of death. Come out from the power of death. Live free from the forces of death. Live in the new life of resurrection, peace, and loving nonviolence. So Lazarus rises and appears at the door of the tomb, but we're told he's tied hand and feet with burial cloths and they're wrapped around his face. In other words, these are very symbolic images. Lazarus cannot hear, see, speak, reach out, or walk, which means he cannot hear Jesus, see Jesus, speak the good news of Jesus, reach out and serve Jesus and the poor, or walk in the footsteps of Jesus. These are all actions which symbolize discipleship to Jesus. Lazarus, humanity, is still a victim of the culture of death and as yet cannot follow the God of life So the third commandment, unbind him and let him go free. Unbind humanity from all the trappings of death and let humanity go free. It's one of the greatest lines in the gospel. And what happens? We don't know. Chapter 11 ends with Lazarus standing there. So the story, it's so brilliantly written, it's left unfinished. Lazarus standing at the tomb, humanity is still stuck. So we could say John's community is trying to say our job as disciples of the God of life and the nonviolent Jesus is to unbind one another and all people everywhere in the world from the culture of death and the trappings of death and all that keeps us from the nonviolence of the nonviolent Jesus, if you will. I think it's just spectacular when it's read this way. And then the story takes on new meaning in life of the movements. So Dr. King in Birmingham and the civil rights activists are Jesus as the God of life, calling humanity out from the death of segregation and racism. First of all, calling the suffering African Americans out freedom. And second of all, calling the stubborn white people stuck in their stupid and lethal racism, being freed from that form of death. Everybody's being freed. It's the story of Mandela and Tutu and all the resistors in South Africa calling the stone of apartheid to be rolled away and the South African people to come forward in freedom. It's the story of Dorothy Day refusing to take cover in fallout shelters during the nuclear war air raid practice drills. As I said, the story of Dan and Phil at Catonsville and Plowshares. So my question is, how is it your story too? Where are you in the raising of Lazarus story? How are you living out these three commandments? You could say, well, where are you in the different characters? Part of you are like me, a bombastic churchman saying, okay, I'm off to die with Jesus, but not even showing up. Or you could be just a professional person of the culture of death, good, upstanding, devout servant of America. Not good. Could be really great, devout women, heroic disciples who try to stop Jesus from raising the dead, who protest the raising of Lazarus and the rolling of the stone, because it disrupts everything. Just all our lives are going to be disrupted if Lazarus rises from the dead. None of us will ever be the same. And that's what the community is trying to tell us happened to them. And he commanded, roll away the stone, and they did it. So how can we live out these three commandments? Take away the stone. Humanity, come forth from the culture of death. Unbind one another and live free in the new life of resurrection, peace, and love. How might we deepen in our faith that death does not get the last word, that death does not have the final sway over us, and that we will no longer have any part of the culture of death. That's why I always quote the great poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. I think that's the Johannine community, that we are called to obey these commandments, have nothing to do with death, and spend our lives calling people out of war making and all the metaphors of death for like racism and greed and fear and fossil fuels and oil and corporate greed, and to live free from the new life of nonviolence. And this is our hope, and not to be afraid of resurrection, to want resurrection and to want that hope and that much freedom. It's very powerful. So I'm just going to go through briefly chapter 12 and wrap it up. And then next week we will go from chapter 13, probably up till 17. And then we'll have one more session. So now we're back in Bethany. All we're told is that Martha and Mary are throwing a dinner party in honor of Jesus. It's so touching. and Lazarus is there alive and well. But of course, there's death threats out against Jesus and Lazarus now too. And it's there at the dinner party 6 days before Passover. So Passover is on Friday, that according to John. So this is a Sunday night dinner party, the first day of the week, I suppose. And Mary, we're told in great detail, takes the very expensive, most precious, expensive oil you can get and anoints Jesus' feet and dries them with her hair. And the whole house was full of this fragrant oil. And what happens? One of the disciples blows up, angry, furious. Well, it's Judas Iscariot, and we're told why and all. But it's very mysterious, you know. Any of the men could have blown up at Mary, and because they don't understand Mary. And they're resentful because Mary's onto something that they can't comprehend, which Jesus has been explaining from day one. And Mary of Bethany now gets. Why was this oil not sold for 300 days' wages and given to the poor? Judas Iscariot says. You know, which is a political question of movement people. But we're told specifically he does not care about the poor. He asked this because he was a thief and he was in charge of the money bag of the community. In other words, he was the treasurer of the Jesus movement, and he stole money all the time from the money bag. He stole the contributions. And Jesus turns to him. Now, I've thought a lot about this, and I just I invite you to imagine how you see this. Jesus says, again, I'm always contending Jesus is very gentle, but he does say to Judas, leave her alone. Oh, first of all, that's so incredible. Our guy always defending women, but there's much more here. This Mary of Bethany, maybe she doesn't even realize what she's done, but Jesus gets it completely and stands up to Judas. Leave her alone. Let her keep this for the day of my burial. What? Who's talking about burial? We just said God of life, resurrection. Huh? You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. It means you're always going to be serving the poor and feeding the poor and giving money to the poor. And I am poor too. And does Jesus put Judas down? Or does he defend Mary? Does that lead to resentment in Judas? I don't think so. Is Judas embarrassed or humiliated in front of the whole household there? If so, I don't know, but he goes out to plot to kill Jesus. But it says from then on, the chief priests and the Pharisees plotted to kill Jesus and Lazarus too. So we don't really know about that. You can speculate from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. What we do know is that Mary of Bethany has anointed Jesus and prepared him for crucifixion. That's the radical thing that I invite us all to really try to reflect on as we move into Holy Week and go through Lent. Nobody else did that. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus always talking about, look, when we get there, they're going to kill me. No, when we get there, they're going to arrest me and torture me and kill me, and I will rise on the third day. And the men have no idea. And then Peter says, God forbid that should happen to you. And we're told specifically that Peter rebukes Jesus. No one understands Jesus. And so we get the story of the Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah come to Jesus and say, okay, Jesus, you can do this. You can go all the way in the way of the cross and liberate the whole human race from the culture of death. by transforming death itself into the doorway of resurrection, things like that. Here, for the first time, we have a disciple not only encouraging Jesus, but anointing Jesus to go all the way on the way of the cross. And what we're going to look at next week is so spectacular. Jesus learns from Mary of Bethany and is then going to anoint the disciples to prepare them to follow him on the way of the cross. And of course, in John 13, we've spent 2,000 years totally misunderstanding that. The washing of the feet has nothing to do with being service. It's not what it's about at all. We'll look at that next week. So the last little images, if you're still with me here, if you're not completely zonked out, is the Palm Sunday symbol of Jesus as a new king, the king of nonviolence, fulfilling the great image from Zechariah 9, chapter 9, verse 9 to 10. I think it's one of the most important two verses in the entire Bible. I'm going to read it, look it up, because it changes everything. So, okay, it's Passover. Pilate is entering Jerusalem on the war horse with 600 soldiers. We know the number. It's called the whole cohort, with the full guard and the centurion himself, like the head of the military. It's the full power of empire entering into the royal gate of the old city to be there when the religious festival happens and getting some of the money. And on the other side of town, Jesus rides in on a donkey to fulfill Zechariah 9. Here's the text. And listen to how beautiful this is. Rejoice heartily. Okay? Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice with all your heart, O daughters, Zion. Shout for joy, Jerusalem. See, your nonviolent king shall come to you. A just Savior is he, meek, gentle, humble of heart, and nonviolent, riding on a donkey, not a war horse. He shall banish the war chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. The warrior's bow shall be banished, and he shall proclaim peace to the nations, and his dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. This nonviolent king is getting rid of all weapons of war and establishing a new kingdom, a new realm, a whole new world of nonviolence to the ends of the earth. That's what Jesus chooses intelligently, consciously, to leave us with, an image he's leaving us with as he enters Jerusalem. Isn't that spectacular? If you see it from the perspective of nonviolence, it's the most beautiful thing ever. And we've completely lost the political implications of Palm Sunday. That this means you can't have anything to do with a war horse, hello, nuclear weapons, genocide in Israel, waging war, having guns, having anything to do with violence or harm or killing or supporting the country's violence, harm, or killing, and its symbols and metaphors and means of death. We are part of his campaign of nonviolence, spreading his reign of nonviolence from sea to sea, to the ends of the earth. I think it's one of the greatest scenes in the Gospels and the entire Bible. And the question before us is, do you want a king of nonviolence? I don't know. I think we just have to sit with that. Do we really want a king of suffering, nonviolent love, who will be crowned with thorns, who will give his life to abolish war and establish peace from sea to the ends of the earth? If so, are we going to serve him? Are we going to vote for him? Are we going to do what he says? Are we going to be part of his campaign, his street theater? And so we're told that the religious authorities say, look, the whole world is going after him. We better do something and kill him or, all of Jerusalem will collapse. So we get to those last verses. Just then, a couple of Greeks come up to Philip. Sir, we would like to see Jesus. To which, when Jesus hears about it, he says, the hour has come for the Son of Humanity to be glorified. Wes Howard Brooke goes on at length about this because it's the very first time we get some of this agricultural image, but it's the same as John 4 with the woman at the well. These Greeks, this means the end of the world has heard about Jesus now. These are full-on Gentiles, and they've come to Jerusalem for the feast, but now they want to know Jesus. And they never get to meet Jesus. But the hour has come. The Johannine community is the one they will eventually meet. You see? And that's when we'll all begin to see how the glory of God is happening. But Jesus saw it then and there. So beautiful. And so we get these closing lines. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it produces much fruit. About hating your life to preserve it for eternal life. This is the logic of nonviolence. And then these very touching lines, whoever serves me follows me, and where I am, my servant will be. So we're going to stand with Jesus, the Good Shepherd, as he calls humanity out of the tombs, as he faces the death squads, as he rides into Jerusalem, and as he is crucified, and as he rises from the dead. We're going to be with him. And then, as if none of this was dramatic enough, we get the voice of God speaks from the heaven, which, like, I always forget. I never hear anybody talking about. Jesus says to God, Father, glorify your name. And a voice came from heaven saying, I have glorified it and will glorify it. The crowd thinks it's thunder. Some say an angel spoke. Now is the time of the judgment. The ruler of this world will be driven out. So nobody knows who that voice is, but Jesus hears it. And for me and my friend Tom Gumbleton, the next sentence, the end of chapter 12, is really the basis for all my hope. When I am lifted up from earth, I will draw everyone to myself. Now, that's, I just want to point that out. Chapter 12, verse 32. I invite you to see if you agree with me, and maybe you don't. And you can read Wes, because I'm not sure he would agree with me. I think this means, because we've heard about lifting up and Moses and the serpent in the desert. We heard about that earlier. When I am lifted up, meaning on the cross, when I am executed in perfect nonviolent love, because I am the fullness of universal love, universal compassion, universal peace, universal life, love and life, and the God of life here, I will win out. And I will win over every single human being who ever lived in the end. Does Jesus want to be killed? No. He's saying, you don't have to kill me. Just do what I say. Love one another. Love your enemies. Put down the sword. Let's enjoy life. It's a never-ending wedding banquet. What's the problem? But if you're going to kill me, I'm still going to win you over through my way of active, daring, public nonviolence on the cross. And
Hello.
so he says, believe with me. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you for listening to me. And let's do what we've been doing and just raise your hand in the from down below in the little box that says react. You can raise your hand and I'll call on you. If you want to just offer any brief comment or a brief question or what you're not sure about or how you disagree or how any of this touches you in this story. I realize that's an awful lot. And I hope this is helpful. Who'd like to start us off? Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Just jump right on in with your comment or question. And you can unmute yourself if you want and just jump in. Yes, Anne. Jean Ann, is it? You're muted, so go ahead and unmute yourself, John and Jean Ann.
To your all things that you do and read your books and everything, but this has been one of the most, I've been having a hard time being quiet, being trying to be nonviolent, because I have been so upset by what is being done in our world for all the anxieties and the chaos that everyone is going through, that I get too involved in it, and I want to know what I can do. I'm going to be 90 this year, and so I can't do a lot of things that I used to do. We'd see you down at Fort Benning, Georgia. We've seen you with Kathy Kelly. We just saw them recently, and it was wonderful to be with them. It's I'm just trying to calm myself down, and I must say you're helping me so much. I just have needed to have calming.
That's great. I'm glad.
I
And by
cry
the
a
way,
lot.
yeah, that's the way we're supposed to be. The Johannine community is in total agony at the end of the world. They're being hunted down, and they're presenting Jesus as a good shepherd, greener pastures, peace, life, light, calm. This is really good news. That's our first responsibility. And by the way, my friends here will forgive me for my name dropping, but that's the way Thich Nhat Hanh taught and what he talked with me about. And he had a lot of reason to be upset. 3 million people were killed by the United States in Vietnam. And he personally knew by name 1,000 people. When his brother was killed, he'd got in bed and stayed in bed for 3 months. But he processed it and decided to live life to the full in total nonviolence and peace and calm as the first gift. I think that's what the gospel is saying here, that nothing phases us. We expect the empire of Pilate and Trump to bring death and destruction and to be hunting down the poor and children. This is what empires do. We are going to be trusting in Jesus and doing what we can. That's why I'm writing and talking about surrender, Joanne, and that we just keep surrendering to Jesus, being with Jesus, and asking him to guide you, listen to his voice, spend time with the gospel, and you'll be fine. And rejoice heartily. See, the nonviolent king is bringing peace. He's doing it. We don't have to do it. Thank you. God bless you. Hey, Lynn, what do you think about all this carrying on? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm unmuted now. I think I have two things to say. The first is that this webinar series and your podcast has been kind of an antidote to the doom scrolling that I could get into. And so to keep me from having all of that chaos shoved down my throat, this whole culture of death, I've been really turning to what is the gospel of life? What is Jesus saying? How and who is talking about it, and go to that instead of what did the Mango Mussolini do today?
Yeah, does that make you feel better by it? Does it help?
Oh yes, I
Does
am
it
much
inspire you to
more.
resist if you listen to
Yes,
voices of doom? No.
yeah. So
Listen to the
I'm
voice
much.
of Jesus. Yeah, what's the other point?
The other thing is, we were talking about Lazarus and as humankind,
Yeah,
and also Lazarus as the best friend of Jesus.
I
And
guess.
I think also in maybe it was in your book I was reading, but um, I think our culture, the American culture, is so individualistic. It's hard to have the community. So we're so focused
Absolutely.
on me, me, me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We've lost the community. And so this resurrection is not just an individual thing, but it's a communal thing. And so that's been helpful in reading, especially the raising of Lazarus, to see these caricatures as individuals, as part of a community, and then as representative of a whole community. So I think in our culture, we've especially just kind of washed away social sin, you know, and focus on purity laws that it's the propaganda that there's no culture of death because we're not going to talk about racism or we're not going to talk about war. We're only going to talk about your individual behavior.
Right. So the
Am
culture
I
of death.
seeing that the right
Oh,
way?
yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm remembering Daniel Berrigan, you say that death covers its tracks. And the empire is always, the culture of death is pretending that everything is great. And let's make it great again. And we're number one. And it's all death all the time. And a sign of that is the radical individualism of this country, which was rooted in the genocide of the indigenous people and the enslavement of African Americans, and plantation economics for the billionaires. You know, not much has changed, just the details of the killing. If you see my general point. Whereas I've read a theologian and scripture scholar who says, is it possible that nothing in the gospel is individualistic? That everything is intended for community, even the call. But the way we live and act together is total community. You could argue the first act Jesus does is form community until his last dying breath. And then his first rising breath, he's trying to form community. And that's the way we're going to be able to get by, because for John, we're going to be living in the Spirit, and the Spirit comes in community. Lynn, we can go to town on all those reflections. And that means, first and foremost, get out and connect with people. Don't be sitting alone if you can. That's why I think Zoom is a miracle. It can be, oddly enough, a way that we can all have community with one another, but we should definitely be in community. Thank you, Lynn. Hey, Steve, what do you think?
Good afternoon. And first of all, thank you for this. This is really very illuminating. And I appreciate it very much. I have a question. I don't know if it's significant or not, but I have a question about the timeline in John's Gospel. In chapter 10, we're told that it's Hanukkah, it's wintertime. And in the very next chapter, that is the raising of Lazarus, which would have been just a few days afterwards, because when he was going to go back, the disciples said, don't go back there. They just tried to stone you a couple of days ago. So the raising of Lazarus must have been around the same time, around Hanukkah. And then, if I'm not mistaken, in chapter 12, it's now Passover. So
what's your question?
Is there any significance to the fact that there's no mention of Jesus between Hanukkah and Passover in the Gospel of John, or is that just
I'm
not
sure
important?
there is, and it's gone way over my head, and I've just been so busy. I just can't keep up with, there's so much to study about all of that. Yes, there's significance. I've seen people who have spent their lives tracing the journey of Jesus. You can compare the four Gospels, the timelines. Megan McKenna now says, in fact, some scholars are now saying Jesus only was alive for his public life for 8 months. That's the latest consensus, but others would say it's 3 years. John, he's going back and forth to Jerusalem. It's very hard to keep track. It's actually, the 7 signs of glory. The hour is not year, but actually it's noon, and then it's the middle of the day, and then it's evening, and then the hour has arrived. The whole gospel could be read as one day. So the symbolism is almost infinitely rich. And I invite you to go study it. And a good place to begin, who does get into it, is this great book, which I'm going to keep harping on as the best. Although there are other really good books, and certainly anything Raymond Brown, the great, brilliant Catholic scholar, wrote on John is very, very powerful. He was interested in that kind of thing. I think I'm just going to say, and forgive me, Jim Martin, he has this big bestseller out on Lazarus, and I just think he misses the point. I don't think the story makes sense unless you read it from this hermeneutic of nonviolence, and then you begin to see that it's all life and death, and have nothing to do with death. And very few people get that. And that's why I'm harping away on this, because I'm trying, I know this is crazy, but I think this is the great need of our time. And this gospel has been buried for 2,000 years. If you read the commentaries, Steve, they say nobody understands John. It's a spiritual metaphor full of symbolism. That may be true, but I think it's in your face politically too. And it's the community calling us to something. Anyway, you get my point. Thanks, Steve. Hey, Michelle, you surviving all my ranting and raving?
Hey, John. Yeah, I'd like to share just one personal reflection, and I do have one question for you. So, it's interesting. I think you were talking about finding ourselves in the story. I think tonight, as you were going over it, it was the first time I read this gospel narrative, the story of Lazarus, and saw myself as Lazarus,
Yes.
and I had an experience about 12 years ago where I felt like I was called out of the culture of death. But then tonight, what I was thinking about was all those bindings and wrappings that Lazarus came out with. And like, how many am I still dragging around? How many of those bindings and wrappings, from the tomb, have I managed to get rid of, and how many are still there? So it's just a personal reflection.
Can I reflect with you on that before you get to the
Sure.
question? I really thank you for bringing that up. And I was in my notes to say that. I said, we're part of everybody, and we can see ourselves in every character. But apparently, if this thesis is correct, all of us are at some level dead and stuck in the culture of death. And if you follow the image through, you can't take the wrappings off, Michelle. It's the community that can do it. You cannot do it.
Right.
And so to follow your image is so helpful, because we all feel that. We're all Lazarus at some point. And yet we're also all rolling away the stone. We're also all Martha blocking Jesus. And we're also all being called out. And then we're all also unbinding each other. Who has been unbinding you? It's a great question. And
Yeah.
who are you unbinding?
Mm.
How is your work unbinding humanity? And if everybody doesn't know, Michelle, my friend, is the director of the Franciscan Action Network, one of the great groups in the country, which has thousands of Franciscans and lay Franciscans. Look them up. They're doing great projects. That's what you're doing. But you can reflect on who's doing that for you. And I don't know, if you're not there yet, if you're still dead, ask Jesus to call you out of the tomb, I guess. Anyway,
Yeah.
what a good question. Thank you
Yeah.
for being
Anyway, well, and thank you. And definitely, John, I was just thinking you're definitely one of the people who's especially, I think, helped to peel the bindings off from my eyes and help me. There are many, many things that once you have helped me see them, I've said, like, I can't unsee it anymore. Anyway. So, and just here's my question quickly. Just in chapter 10, there's this whole puzzling exchange about the people saying to Jesus, "You're a blasphemer," and then Jesus quotes them from the scriptures, "Has it not been written in your law? I said you are gods." And then he goes on and he talks about, "So that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father." And seems like it's always understood as like Jesus talking about, I mean, the heading on my version is Jesus asserts his deity, or it's about the Trinity or whatever. But I've always wondered, like, what is this about? And is Jesus just speaking about himself, or is he speaking about all of us having, divine life within us?
Sure. All of us have God in us. And that's the scandal and the good news. And that's the whole, I was just lecturing all night about that last night to these poor crowds in Lynchburg. Blessed are the peacemakers. They are the sons and daughters of God. Love your enemies, then you're sons and daughters of God. The whole point of the Gospel of John, remember at the beginning, you were at the first class, halfway through the prologue is to become children of God. And so we see there, he's saying it, and I and the Father are one, and the sheep. But, the way I read that when I was reading that this week, I don't know. I have to go back, and I didn't have time to really see what Wes says this. Do you have this book, Michelle? It's a book you need to get someday.
Yeah.
Someday, it's a reference. This book and Jed Myers are reference books that you return to for the rest of your life. And then when you come to that verse, you can look it up and you'll read his page about it and you'll be shocked. But I thought Jesus keeps trying everything he can, the poor guy. So in this instance, he quotes scriptures to them because he's so smart. And later it says, how does he know all the scriptures? Isn't he? He's from Nazareth. He doesn't even have school. But he knows the scriptures better than anybody because he is the word of God, according to John. Well, anyway, I think that's what that's alluding to. But, it is a climactic sentence. I am in the Father and the Father is in me. And then we'll get to the Father and I are one. And then he's going to chastise Philip in 2 more chapters. Don't you see? If you see me, you have seen the Father. So, and finally, Thomas says, no, I don't believe. And then he sees Jesus and he believes. Oh, now you believe? So I like that it's all left open and it's very mysterious. It's John's community's way of saying, do you believe this? His question to Martha and his question to Thomas and question to us, the readers. Which is to say, I'm not sure about any of it, Michelle, and I've been reading it and teaching it for years, and I still don't know. But I would urge you to go back and read Wes, who's, I think, the first person to really scratch the surface on this. And I think we have only just scratched the surface on the meaning of the Gospels, because we've only had a Gandhian Kingian view in recent years. So I hope that wasn't too vague or obscure or avoiding your question, but it might have been. Okay.
No, thank
Hey,
you.
Barbara Finch, what do you make of all that? You're muted, Barbara.
I think the challenge of any of us that consider ourselves activists and truly desire to be a difference, I think as individuals and also groups of us are so very siloed, and this whole concept of an invitation to be a broader community is what God is inviting us to. I think that the MAGA movement, the Christian nationalist, why adversely they're so effective in our country and the world is they do come together. They're not as siloed. And I think that's the challenge of all of us, to come together, to be a movement, a Jesus movement, if you will, sort of thing. I don't know what you think about that, but that That's been my struggle here in Pittsburgh. There's so many groups, but you have 5 people here and 10 people here. And why don't we all get together and try to do this together, you know?
Oh, and in fact, I have been thinking about that all weekend because I've been visiting this community in Virginia and meeting a lot of different people. Just the churches to begin with. You know, first of all, I think the church, John's gospel really indicts the church, in my opinion, very clearly. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we see the failures of the church, but also the possibilities of the church that John is calling us to, which is a much more spirit-led agape community of peace, hope, love, and nonviolence, a community of resurrection now. So as you were speaking about silos, you know, and you could say, I mean, it seemed like there's almost a church, a Catholic church in every corner in Pittsburgh. You know, there is a church on every block in Lynchburg, Virginia, the home of Jerry Falwell, where I'm at. And, you know, it's the second capital of the Confederacy. So just do the math. Talk about segregation. And I have friends here. So I'm just saying this is our story. But I was thinking, Barbara, about, remember World War II and why did so many surviving men, soldiers cling to the memory in their life as veterans? They had community.
Community, yeah.
The only time in their lives they had community. And the churches have failed at creating community that holds us together and gives us life. And that's what John's friends found. And that's going to be one of the last words Jesus calls us to do, hold each other together in community in the Greek. The risen Jesus will say. And we continue to fail. And I've seen it because I've been with different church people here in this town, which is new to me. And there's so many good people. Just the churches alone, there's not much of a public movement, but the churches are good, but nobody knows each other and nobody wants to get to know each other because, as I'm being taught, there's a real thing here, a legacy about the status quo. You don't rock the boat. Well, that's exactly what Martha doesn't want. The stench is rocking the boat and bringing change, and we don't want that. It's again, fighting individualism, connecting with one another, building bridges, building community, and building it around the way that Jesus offers, the path, active nonviolence, resistance, compassion, service to the poor, justice, protection of creation, all of these things. Thank you, Barbara. Friends, I know it's almost time, but there's 5 minutes left and no one's got a hand up and we're just hanging out and everybody's bored and tired. I should call on somebody. Chris, I'm going to hold on you and see what Catherine Perry thinks, or Janet. I see you smiling there. You want to say something? Go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself to us.
My name's Janet, and
You don't mind me mentioning Lynchburg?
no, I'm in Charlottesville, and I attended the workshop that John led on Saturday, and it was so wonderful in Lynchburg, and it's just so inspiring. I'll say one thing and I'll ask a question. So I wanted to share, I saw the film No Other Land last night. If anybody has a chance to see it, it won the Academy Award, Palestinian and Israeli filmmakers. But just as Michelle said, you have given me eyes that once I see through these eyes of the nonviolent Jesus, you see it everywhere, and especially watching a film like that. It's just so challenging. My question is, we were just talking about community. Do you feel, as an activist for so long, was it easier to build community before? Are we more isolated now? Or do we have more opportunity to come together?
I don't know. I would say all of the above. And I'm learning what I've been told from day one by my teachers, especially Daniel Berrigan, that everything is about connection. Everything is about relationships. Remember Thomas Merton's teaching, don't place your hope as you work for peace and justice and results. Leave the outcome to God. Place your hope, focus on the relationships that you have as you go about your work for peace and justice. God's going to take care of everything. We just get to join each other's hands and be friends and follow the Good Shepherd. And I saw my teachers do that and go through ups and downs. And we're going through this terrible moment. And but they stayed faithful, and they stayed faithful to friendship. And that's why I talk about friendship in light of the gospel. I don't know anybody else who does, but to me, it's a critical part of it because I saw it in Daniel Berrigan, the way he talked about his friends, Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day and Phil and so many other friends, that the movement for peace was actually a movement of friendship, if you see what I mean, that the relationship and that and all of those friendships that I have had with them are still true today. Hundreds of them have died, and I still feel they're with me. And because the relationship was key, and we did what we could, but the outcome was in God's hands anyway. I think things are harder, and were you there last night? I can't remember about them
I
asking.
wasn't,
Yeah, young
no.
people, and Dan always has hope in young people, and I do too. And especially after the Parkland students organized, and Greta Thunberg as the environmentalist, and the young people in Black Lives Matter that I've met, I'm just amazed at all of them. And they don't have or using the many good resources we have. So what I'm saying is, yeah, it's very hard. We're witnessing the collapse of the churches. So we don't have that as a basis. Communities of faith, which were critical to all movements, I submit. Critical to the civil rights movement, critical to the abolitionists, critical to the suffragists. It's a great loss. But we still have remnants of it, and we have enough to go on while we still do. And we can still build, like they did in Latin America and Africa, base Christian communities, as an example. Small affinity groups. And Brazil had 100,000 at one point of registered base Christian communities with 50 people in each. So communities within communities within communities. That's where I think we're headed. And even as we resist and do our work for justice and peace, as we're called. Maybe, so I don't, again, no, I'm not answering your question. I'm just reflecting with you. It's a little of all of that. I've always seen my work as just sowing seeds for a harvest I won't live to see. And that's great. And I've been part of a harvest that many before us have done for us that we don't know. And this is how the story goes, apparently. But I have small communities. I urge you to find one, Janet, or to create one in Charlottesville. And, don't wait for someone from on high to bring it. Just go ahead and start something, get some friends, put up a notice, and see where it goes and watch miracles happen, things like that. That would be a good response to John's gospel, because it's clearly a call from a very specific community to say, look at what we found and see from us. This is it. That's the testimony that I hear. We're becoming sons and daughters of God. Join us. And we can do that. And there's a lot of good people in Charlottesville and doing really good work. And, what I was trying to do Saturday, well, we did so many things, but we all need to start affinity groups everywhere. We're only 2 months into Trump. It's hard to believe. And so we better be organizing and resisting. That's what I talk about, by the way, this week on my podcast, with Shane Claiborne that folks might like.
Mm.
Anyway, the time is about up, and maybe that's a good note to end on. I'm sorry it's all so overwhelming. I hope it was helpful. I have no idea. Everybody looks kind of glazed over and passed out, and they can't take it anymore. Catherine, except for Catherine Perry, who's got fireworks going off in her apartment. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
So keep reading John. If you want to keep hanging in here with me, we're going to look at chapter 13, verse 1, and certainly through chapter 16, but maybe chapter 17. So I can't still decide exactly how the last class will go. But if you want to keep reading as much as you can, get Wes Howard Brooks' book if you can, or read my book, Lazarus Come Forth, or better yet, just sit with the gospel and where are you in the story, and what is the Good Shepherd saying to you, and how are you being called out of the tombs of America, this culture of death that we are all stuck in, and all our families and friends and coworkers are stuck in. How can we help unbind one another? We have more power than we realize because we're serving the God of life. So it's really not even us doing the work. So don't be afraid. Go forth. Be peaceful. There's email Michelle. And I'm going to sign off and stop the recording, but I'll stay on if anyone wants to talk a little bit more. So bye-bye. God bless everybody. See you next week.